The Second World War is a story about the entire world. It is a history of immense courage and terrible cruelty. This conflict, from 1939 to 1945, redrew the map and reshaped millions of lives. The war began September 1st, 1939, when German forces invaded Poland, triggering a global conflict. It pulled in nations across the globe and became a struggle for the very future of humanity. World War II stands alone in the annals of history. It was a conflict of unprecedented scale, ferocity, and consequence. It was a total war, meaning that it wasn't just fought by soldiers on distant battlefields. It was a war that involved entire societies. Factories were converted to produce tanks and planes instead of cars and tractors. Food and fuel were rationed for civilians to support the war effort. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers, taking on jobs previously held by men who were now fighting. Propaganda posters filled the streets, and radio broadcasts brought news from the front lines directly into people's homes, making the war a constant, inescapable presence. The fighting itself was more brutal and technologically advanced than anything seen before. The First World War was known for its static trench warfare, but the Second was a war of movement and machines. Germany unleashed its Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, using fast-moving tanks and dive bombers to overwhelm its enemies. Great naval battles were fought with enormous aircraft carriers that projected power across vast oceans. Cities were subjected to relentless bombing campaigns, turning places like London, Dresden, and Tokyo into infernos. It was a war that introduced the world to the atomic bomb, a weapon of such terrifying power that it changed the nature of warfare forever. This was not just a war over territory or resources, it was a profound clash of ideas. On one side were the Axis powers, driven by ideologies of fascism, militarism, and racial supremacy. They believed in the right of the strong to dominate the weak and sought to create new world orders based on their own brutal principles. On the other side were the Allies, a diverse group of nations united by their opposition to this aggression. They fought for principles like democracy, freedom, and national sovereignty. This ideological struggle gave the war a moral dimension, making it a fight for the very soul of modern civilization. The human cost of this global conflict is almost beyond comprehension. It is estimated that between 70 and 85 million people lost their lives. This staggering number includes not only soldiers killed in combat, but also millions of civilians who died from bombing raids, starvation, disease, and systematic mass murder. The Holocaust, the Nazi regime's deliberate and industrial-scale genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims, remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. The war left behind a world shattered by loss, with countless families broken and entire communities erased from existence, a deep wound on the collective memory of the 20th century. Studying the Second World War is more than just a history lesson. It is a vital exercise in understanding the world we live in today. The consequences of the war are all around us. The conflict led to the downfall of old empires and the rise of two new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Their rivalry would define the next chapter of global history, the Cold War, a period of intense ideological struggle and nuclear tension that lasted for decades. The war also spurred the creation of new international institutions, most notably the United Nations, which was founded with the hope of preventing such a catastrophe from ever happening again. The war also acted as a powerful catalyst for social and technological change. The urgent need for new weapons and technologies led to rapid advancements in fields like aviation, rocketry, computing, and medicine. The development of penicillin, for example, saved countless lives both during and after the war. The social fabric of many nations was also transformed. The war challenged old ideas about race and gender, as people from all walks of life contributed to the war effort. For many countries, the shared experience of sacrifice and victory forged a new sense of national identity that continues to resonate to this day. By examining this period, we learn crucial lessons about the dangers of unchecked aggression, extreme nationalism, and intolerance. We see how economic hardship and political instability can create fertile ground for dangerous ideologies to take root. The story of the road to war is a cautionary tale, showing how a series of small steps, appeasement, and a failure of international cooperation can lead to a global disaster. It reminds us that peace is fragile and must be actively defended. It forces us to confront the darkest aspects of human nature, but it also shows us incredible examples of bravery, resilience, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Therefore, remembering World War II is our responsibility. We owe it to the millions who suffered and died to understand why it happened. We owe it to future generations to learn the lessons of the past so that we might avoid repeating its worst mistakes. This series will take you on a journey through this defining period. We will explore the causes of the war, follow the major campaigns across the globe, hear the stories of the people who lived through it, and examine its lasting aftermath. This is the untold story of the Second World War, a story of conflict and consequences that continues to shape our world. The road to the Second World War begins at the very end of the First. The Great War, which ended in 1918, left Europe exhausted and broken. The peace that followed was meant to heal these wounds, but in many ways, it only poured salt on them. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was supposed to establish a lasting peace. Instead, it created a foundation of bitterness and resentment, particularly in Germany. The terms of the treaty were incredibly harsh, creating a powerful sense of injustice that would fester for years. This peace to end all peace was a fragile one from the start. The unresolved anger and economic turmoil left by the First World War made another war almost inevitable. Into this volatile world of economic despair stepped a new kind of leader. In the 1920s and 30s, dictators rose to power, promising simple solutions. They offered national glory, order, and scapegoats. In Italy, Benito Mussolini seized power in 1922, crushing opposition and establishing a totalitarian state. The most fateful of these leaders was Adolf Hitler in Germany. Hitler, a hypnotic speaker, blamed Germany's problems on the Treaty of Versailles and Jewish people. The Great Depression gave Hitler his chance. Appointed Chancellor in 1933, he dismantled democracy, terrorized opponents, and began rearmament. Meanwhile, Japan, run by a military elite, sought to rule Asia. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria. Germany, Italy, and Japan formed the Axis, united by their desire to overturn the world order by force. In the 1930s, Britain and France desperately tried to avoid war, a policy known as appeasement. At the Munich Conference in 1938, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland. Chamberlain declared he had secured peace for our time. But in 1939, Hitler's armies marched into Czechoslovakia, proving his ambition for conquest. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union paved the way for Hitler to invade Poland. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, plunging the world into war. The world watched in stunned silence. On September 1st, 1939, the peace was torn apart. German forces swarmed across the Polish border. It was the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. German panzer tanks punched through Polish defenses. Stuka dive bombers terrorized troops and civilians alike. They smashed communication lines and railways. The Polish army was tragically outmatched against Germany's modern mechanized army. The Polish Air Force was destroyed within the first 48 hours. Cities like Warsaw were deliberately bombed. Britain and France declared war on Germany. They were left to face the full might of the Nazi war machine. The Soviet Union invaded from the east. Trapped between two gigantic hostile powers, the fate of Poland was sealed. Warsaw was reduced to rubble. In just over a month, Poland had been conquered, vanishing from the map of Europe once more. The war had begun. After Poland, a deceptive calm settled over Western Europe. The winter of 1939 and the spring of 1940 became known as the Phoney War. While the Allies waited, Hitler planned his next move. The calm was shattered in April 1940 with the invasion of Denmark and Norway. This defeat forced the resignation of British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, replaced by Winston Churchill. Then, on May 10, 1940, the real storm broke. Hitler unleashed the Blitzkrieg, invading France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The German masterstroke was a thrust by the Panzer Force through the Ardennes forest. The result was a military catastrophe. France surrendered. The Nazi swastika now flew over Paris. With France fallen, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. An invasion seemed imminent. Winston Churchill rallied the British people, promising to fight on, never surrender. The nation mobilized. The Home Guard formed. The Royal Navy patrolled the Channel. The key to stopping invasion lay in the air. Hitler needed air superiority. The Battle of Britain was about to begin. The Battle of Britain began in July 1940, fought by young men in fighter planes. The Luftwaffe, led by Hermann Göring, had a numerical advantage. They targeted RAF airfields and radar stations. Britain's Dowding system, an integrated air defense, was a crucial advantage. Hitler's shift to bombing London gave the RAF vital breathing space. The few had won. While Britain fought in the skies, another front opened thousands of miles away. The North African desert became a new battleground for control of the Suez Canal. In 1940, Italy invaded British-held Egypt. By 1941, Hitler sent the Afrika Korps, led by General Erwin Rommel. Rommel, the Desert Fox, pushed British forces back. The Desert War was unique, fought by mobile armies in harsh conditions. Water was precious, supplies were scarce. For 2 years, the front line shifted dramatically between the Allies and Axis. This campaign became a major turning point. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest military invasion in history. The initial assault was devastating, but the Soviet Union did not collapse. Despite losses, the country was too vast to conquer quickly. The brutal Russian winter set in. Just miles from Moscow, the German offensive ground to a halt. The Blitzkrieg had failed. While Germany was becoming bogged down in the vastness of Russia, tensions were reaching boiling point on the other side of the world. The Empire of Japan, led by its militaristic government, continued its aggressive expansion in Asia. Having already conquered much of coastal China and French Indochina, Japan now eyed the resource-rich European colonies in Southeast Asia, such as British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. These colonies held the oil, rubber, and tin that Japan's war machine desperately needed. However, one major obstacle stood in the way of their ambitions: the United States of America and its powerful Pacific Fleet, based at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The United States, though officially neutral, was deeply opposed to Japanese aggression. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had imposed a series of escalating economic sanctions against Japan, culminating in a crippling oil embargo in the summer of 1941. This move was a critical threat to Japan, which imported over 80% of its oil from the United States. The Japanese leadership was faced with a stark choice: either abandon their plans for an empire and submit to American demands, or go to war to seize the resources they needed. They chose war. Their plan was audacious and incredibly risky, a surprise knockout blow against the American fleet. On the morning of Sunday, December 7, 1941, that plan was put into brutal effect. Japanese aircraft, launched from a carrier fleet that had secretly crossed the Pacific, appeared in the skies over Pearl Harbor. The attack was a complete and devastating surprise. For 2 hours, Japanese bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters rained destruction down on the unsuspecting American naval base. They sank or badly damaged 8 battleships, the pride of the Pacific Fleet, along with numerous other cruisers and destroyers. Over 2,400 Americans were killed, and the main airfields on the island were left in ruins. It was a stunning tactical victory for Japan. The attack on Pearl Harbor, however, was also a massive strategic blunder. In a single moment, it shattered America's long-standing policy of isolationism and united the country in a demand for war. The next day, President Roosevelt addressed Congress, famously declaring December 7th a date which will live in infamy. With near unanimous support, the United States declared war on Japan. A few days later, Germany and Italy, honoring their alliance with Japan, declared war on the United States. The conflicts in Europe and Asia had now merged into one single, truly global war. Japan had awakened a sleeping giant, and its immense industrial power would now be fully mobilized for war. In the hours and days following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan unleashed a coordinated storm of attacks across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. This was a multi-pronged offensive designed to seize a vast defensive perimeter and secure the resources of the so-called Southern Resource Area before the United States could recover and strike back. Japanese forces, highly trained and battle-hardened from their war in China, seemed pretty much unstoppable. They invaded the Philippines and launched attacks on the British colonies of Hong Kong and Malaya. They also landed troops in Thailand and captured the American-held islands of Guam and Wake Island. The speed and success of the Japanese advance were honestly breathtaking. The British naval force sent to defend Singapore, known as Force Z, which included the modern battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse, was sunk by Japanese torpedo bombers just 3 days after Pearl Harbor. This was a devastating blow, demonstrating that even the most powerful battleships were vulnerable to air power. On land, Japanese soldiers proved to be masters of jungle warfare, repeatedly outflanking and overwhelming Allied defenders as they swept down the Malay Peninsula towards Singapore. The fall of Singapore in February 1942 was a major humiliation for the British Empire. Considered an impregnable fortress, the Gibraltar of the East surrendered after a brief siege, with over 80,000 British, Australian, and Indian troops taken prisoner. It was the largest surrender in British military history. Elsewhere, the Japanese tide continued to roll forward. They conquered the oil-rich Dutch East Indies, in addition to invading Burma and threatening India. They pushed American and Filipino forces under General Douglas MacArthur out of the Philippines. By the spring of 1942, the red sun of the Japanese flag flew over a vast new empire. For the Allies, this was a period of unbroken disaster and retreat. The Japanese appeared to be an invincible enemy, superior in tactics, equipment, and fighting spirit. They now controlled a massive swathe of ocean and land, rich in resources. From their new defensive line, they planned to wage a war of attrition, hoping to bleed the Allies dry and force them to accept a negotiated peace. But the tide of the war was about to turn. The industrial might of the United States was gearing up, and crucial naval battles lay just over the horizon. For the millions who served, World War II shaped their lives. It was a world of contrasts, boredom, and terror. Whether freezing on the Eastern Front, island hopping in the Pacific, or in the skies over England, daily life meant hardship and uncertainty. They faced death, loss, and discomfort. Each front tested human endurance. Beyond physical danger, the psychological toll was immense, leaving lasting scars. Yet, amidst the hardship, incredible camaraderie emerged. Bonds forged often became the most intense relationships of their lives, providing strength and motivation. World War II wasn't just fought on battlefields, it transformed daily life for millions at home. Factories shifted from making cars to churning out tanks and planes, as entire economies focused on victory. Rationing became the norm. Families queued for food, fuel, and clothing, while propaganda urged everyone to save, grow, and mend. Women filled roles in factories and the military, symbolized by icons like Rosie the Riveter, forever changing gender expectations. Air raids brought the war to civilian doorsteps. Londoners slept in shelters, while cities like Dresden faced devastating bombings. In occupied territories, civilians endured brutal hardship and violence. The line between soldier and civilian blurred. Everyone was part of the war effort. Sacrifice, resilience, and unity defined the home front, leaving lasting social change. The war's reach was total. No one was untouched. The home front became a battlefield of its own, shaping the world as much as any army. Behind the front lines, the Nazis waged a campaign of genocide, the Holocaust. Driven by racist ideology, they systematically targeted Jews and other groups for extermination. Ghettos, forced labor, and mass shootings escalated to industrialized murder in death camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka. Millions were transported in horrific conditions, most sent directly to gas chambers. 6 million Jews, 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, were murdered, alongside millions of other victims. The Holocaust's machinery was chillingly efficient, designed to erase humanity. Allied soldiers uncovered the camps in 1945, revealing horrors that shocked the world. The Holocaust stands as a stark warning of the consequences of hatred and indifference. Its shadow endures, demanding remembrance and vigilance. The Holocaust remains one of history's darkest lessons. The tide turned at Stalingrad, where the Soviet victory marked Nazi Germany's first major defeat. The Red Army pushed west, while the Allies advanced from North Africa and Italy, squeezing the Axis from all sides. Italy's campaign was grueling, but it diverted German forces and set the stage for the main event, D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Allied troops stormed Normandy's beaches, braving fierce resistance to open a crucial second front. The landings at Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword were costly but decisive. With footholds in France, the Allies forced Hitler into a war on 3 fronts. The momentum shifted irreversibly against the Nazis. Each battle brought the Allies closer to Berlin. From the ruins of Stalingrad to the sands of Normandy, the end of the Third Reich was in sight. The world watched as the Allies closed in. Victory was now a matter of time. With Normandy secured, Allied forces surged across France, liberating Paris and pushing toward Germany. The Soviets advanced from the east, crushing resistance as the Third Reich collapsed. Hitler's last gamble, the Battle of the Bulge, failed, exhausting Germany's reserves. In spring 1945, Allied and Soviet troops converged on Berlin. Hitler died by suicide. Mussolini was executed. Germany surrendered on May 7, 1945. VE Day marked the end of war in Europe. In the Pacific, Japan fought on, refusing to surrender despite devastating losses. The US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Faced with annihilation, Japan surrendered, ending World War II. The world erupted in relief and celebration. The dictators had fallen, but the world would never be the same. The cost of victory was almost unimaginable. The war's end brought devastation and hope in equal measure. Cities lay in ruins, millions were dead or displaced, and the horrors of the Holocaust haunted humanity. The United Nations was founded, aiming to prevent future global conflict. The Nuremberg trials established that leaders could be held accountable for war crimes. Old empires faded as the US and Soviet Union emerged as rival superpowers. Their alliance quickly dissolved, dividing Europe and sparking the Cold War. The world split into East and West, locked in a tense ideological standoff. Nuclear weapons cast a long shadow over this new era. World War II ended, but a new, dangerous chapter began, one that would shape the next 50 years. The struggle for peace was far from over. The Second World War remains the most significant and transformative event of the modern era. It is a profound human epic of immense suffering, extraordinary sacrifice, and hard-won victory. The war serves as a powerful reminder of the fragility of peace and the consequences of unchecked aggression. It gave birth to the United Nations and accelerated technological change. We witnessed the depths of depravity in the Holocaust, yet also incredible courage and resilience. These stories are a vital part of our shared human heritage. Therefore, we must never forget the Second World War. By understanding this conflict, we honor the fallen and protect the peace they secured for future generations.